This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here for the first official off-season podcast of Still Enrolled. Tripp, as the season is over, but it is still, for the off-season, an extremely loaded show. We have some college football ratings to dive into here. Why was the national title game so poorly watched? We'll get into that. We have an assistant coach for Ohio State right now, hot on the trail for everybody, wants a piece of him. We'll get to where Jim Knowles could land as well, and a few other Big Ten news and notes, including top 5 Big Ten quarterbacks heading into 2025. A loaded pod. Tripp, welcome to the offseason, man.
Yeah, I'd let you twist my arm to do one of these way too early look-ahead rankings. You know, I'm not a fan of it. Too much can change. You don't even know who's going to be on which team yet at this point. The 5-day portal window is still open for both Ohio State and Notre Dame, and that's for their roster, not just maybe the most coveted coordinator in all of college football right now. But I can't believe we've reached the off season, and I did notice, while still a big intro and the excitement, which I always appreciate that you bring every podcast, the word big outside of Big Ten was not a part of your open. But I'll say it. I think it's a pretty big podcast for Friday morning, January 24th. We apologize. We're a day late here recording this one today, but stuff pops up. But we're going to be here twice a week still during the off season. And let's dive in with the topic du jour, right? We know though, by the time we're done discussing this podcast, yeah, make sure you click to the right thing. By the time we're done discussing this, you're on the podcast. News is going to break that causes most of this discussion to be essentially irrelevant. So there's more to it, I think, than just where Jim Knowles ends up. But that's the story in college football, particularly the last 24 hours. Once we got the report from Football Scoop last night, where, who, what, the dollar amounts for the most coveted right now coordinator in all of college football, Jim Knowles, who led the nation's #1 defense and helped propel Ohio State to a national championship. Remember, my point from Monday night, they don't get to where they are without that defense, and Jim Knowles is the architect of it.
You're right. And referencing that Football Scoop report, right, we got some details on Thursday night about who's in pursuit of Knowles and some dollar figures as well. So right now, as we're recording this on Friday morning, like you said, there are 4 teams trying to either hire or keep Jim Knowles. Obviously, Ohio State trying to keep him on their coaching staff, not let him go anywhere. 3 teams in hot pursuit, big-time national powers: Penn State, Notre Dame, Oklahoma. And according to Zach Barnett, we have some dollar figures here as well. Penn State's preparing an offer or has prepared an offer to Jim Knowles that pays him $3.2 million per year. Oklahoma's prepared to up their offer to $3 million. Notre Dame is showing interest. So if you're showing interest, I'm sure you're in that ballpark here as well. And I'm sure if you're Ohio State, right, Jim Knowles is not going to give you a family discount, if you will. So if you want to keep him, you're going to be basically in that $3 million range as well. He's the best coordinator in all of college football right now, at least on the defensive side, Tripp. This is, you talk about teams going all in. I think first and foremost here, whoever doesn't get Knowles, the 3 teams that don't get him, I think you still have to feel like, at least, you know what? We didn't get him, but at least we tried. Well, you hear that $3.2 million figure from Penn State, Tripp, and it's like, holy hell. Like, if he doesn't go to Penn State, if you're a Nittany Lion fan, sure, it's disappointing that you missed out on the best defensive coordinator of the market. But at least you know what? At least the resources there, at least the buy-in is there to do whatever it takes to get the best guy for the job in your building. Same thing with Oklahoma, same thing with Notre Dame, and probably same thing with Ohio State as well.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of different ways we can look at this discussion, and we'll start there first, right? Like, if you're a Penn State fan, knowing what you bring back already in 2025, to see the alignment between James Franklin, his athletic director, Dr. Pat Kraft, the president of the university, Neely Bendapudi, and James Franklin has discussed this, that he needs buy-in, support from all levels, and felt like it wasn't there until this current administration. Pat Kraft, 3 years now, has been at Penn State. Well, will be 3 years in 2025. So I think as a Penn State fan, regardless of where this goes, you have to be wildly encouraged that Andy Kotelnicki already has decided to return despite head coaching opportunities presenting themselves during this offseason. To see the team investing in the resources for NIL, facility, Beaver Stadium upgrade. And now, if the reported dollar amount is accurate, to have the funding to make a run at someone like this for your vacant position, knowing that now is the time, right? Penn State is on the precipice. You can't get much closer without breaking through than Penn State has. And yeah, you can still make the argument, well, where's that win over a Power 4 team when it really counts? End of the year is the underdog. When are you going to turn that corner? I'm not really invested in that argument anymore. Penn State this season went to a Big Ten championship, won a playoff game, won a second playoff game in the Fiesta Bowl, and was 3 points short of winning the Orange Bowl to go to the national championship. So, if you still have questions, I get it. I'm not invested in that argument. I think I thought this year they made that big step that everyone's been asking them to make, to get into the 12-team playoff, not only make it, I know what their bracket was, but not only to make it, to make the run that they did. So I think the last thing here is to go from, okay, everyone's begging for you to get into the top 4. Well, they got in the top 4. How do you kick that door down? And it seems like all the resources, the player, the buy-in, the NIL, right? You don't retain the type of roster that they retain, that model that's presented itself from Michigan in 2023 and Ohio State in 2024, if you don't have the resources financially, and that includes NIL, that includes the new revenue share come, and the players getting the $20.5 million cut, the student athletes that you spread out across 31 sports, although a majority of that will go to football, that doesn't happen without buy-in at the highest level. So I think regardless if you're Penn State, as a fan, you have to be optimistic about not only the Nittany Lions' chances in 2025, but their long-term staying power moving forward in the sport. For Oklahoma, it might be a little bit different. Brett Venables sees, and if you're Oklahoma, we can make a $3 million investment in a guy who wants to come back to, right? He was at Oklahoma State before he went to Ohio State. You told me what? He's got a fiance that's from Oklahoma? Is that correct?
Or lives, I think it's lives in Oklahoma, I believe. Lives. Yeah, I'm getting this information on Twitter. So, you got to kind of, go carefully there. But I believe his fiance lives in Oklahoma, which obviously you can get some pull there.
If you're Oklahoma, the scenario is, well, I'd rather invest $3 million in one guy than after 2025 blow my whole staff out the door. And that's a huge reset button. And
right.
This is kind of last chance for them. Notre Dame, Al Golden just left to go to the Cincinnati Bengals as their defensive coordinator. So Marcus Freeman is like, well, might as well shoot for the stars here in Jim Knowles. And then Ohio State making $2.2 million per year, still under contract through 2026. There's been reportedly some friction between Day and Knowles. But look, the guy just guided the best defense in all of college football. Probably had the most talent from top to bottom on that defense as well. Right? I think there's a lot of really good defensive coordinators out there. There's a lot of really good offensive coordinators. You're just talking about Penn State, for example. Brent Pry to Manny Diaz to Tom Allen. Penn State's always been a top 15 defense. It's not going to change whoever they bring in, whether they get Knowles or not. It's still going to be a really good defense. I think if you're Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, Oklahoma, all teams have good players, particularly the first 3 who are just in the national semifinals and the national championship. What you want is your defensive coordinator to be able to scheme you to make a difference when it counts the most. That's what you're looking for, right? You're splitting hairs. And I know I shouldn't be the guy talking about hairs, but you're splitting hairs when you're comparing when you have that type of talent, you're going to be able to beat a majority of your schedule with whoever you hire for this position, because whoever you hire for these positions is going to be incredibly qualified. But if you can get plan A, can he be the schematic difference maker to elevate you to a national championship? And that's what these programs feel like. And it was proven this year with what Ohio State did with elite talent, not taking that away, with elite talent to get to that spot. So that's why the investment, the chase, that's why that type of dollar figure is thrown out there, and it's an unprecedented dollar figure. That would be by far and away the highest paid assistant coach for any of these schools in their history and in all of college football.
And to me, it feels worth it. Like I think with what he's done at Ohio State, how he's transformed the defense, because Ohio State's always had talent defensively, right? But like the problem for them is, you mentioned it, in the biggest moments, their defense would fold. In some of the biggest games, whether it's in the playoff, whether it's in bowl games, like their defense would not come through. And you saw this year, really outside of Oregon, in the biggest games, Ohio State's defense came through. They've always had the talent, but now Knowles has been able to put these talented players in positions to succeed and most times dominate in these big games against good offenses. They have shut them down. And so if you're Ohio State, you're able to keep them. If you're Notre Dame, you're able to land them. If you're Penn State, you're able to land them. Or if you're Oklahoma, you can get them. Right? For three of those teams, they're in the Final Four and two in the national title game. Obviously, Oklahoma's kind of the outlier in terms of success. They're 6-7, so they got a long way to go. But like, I think you truly can look at all four of these teams differently next year with whoever gets Jim Knowles. Because like, if you're Notre Dame and it's like, oh, okay, like maybe this was a nice story. They got, a good bracket, but we'll see their staying power. I think now you kind of look at Notre Dame a little bit differently if they can land Jim Knowles. Penn State, again, like you mentioned, they're going all in 2025. I think this adds more ammunition to believe that the Nittany Lions can finally break through after getting so close. Ohio State, Trip, they could lose 10 out of 11 starters on their defense, possibly, depending on how a few underclassmen decide if they want to go to the draft or come back. If that's the case, worst case scenario, only Caleb Downs is a starter back on that defense next year. If you can keep Jim Knowles, despite the inexperience, you still got to feel pretty good that that defense maybe won't be number one like it was in 2024, but still be pretty damn good and give you a chance to repeat as champs in 2025. If you're Oklahoma, like you said in Brent Venables, you have the hope of really kind of, for the first time, putting your foot down, planting a flag, and getting momentum in the SEC going forward for the Sooners. This is, like you said, unprecedented dollar figure. To me, it feels worth it because whoever does land them of these four teams, it feels like your fortunes for 2025 and beyond do change in a really positive way.
Hopefully Oklahoma is not planting that flag at midfield at the Horseshoe, though. For what now? Did you see Ohio State students stormed the Horseshoe in celebration of the national championship on Monday night? I think eventually they let them in through the team tunnel. They came down where the team runs out. So it's to the, if you're facing from the press box side at the shoe, it's to the right side. The teams are actually on opposite. The tunnels at the shoe, and everyone makes a lot of the Michigan narrow tunnel both teams go up it. The tunnels at the shoe, Ohio State's sideline is opposite their tunnel to run up. And then the visitors' sideline is opposite their. So one team has to wait. That's asking for a problem in the future as well at some point. But not to be sidetracked here, I want to give some context. Highest paid, as of December, highest paid assistants in college football this season. LSU defensive coordinator Blake Baker, and this is from On3 and USA Today, $2.5 million. Wink Martindale, Michigan defensive coordinator, $2.3 million. Jim Knowles, Ohio State defensive coordinator, $2.2 million. Pete Golding, Ole Miss defensive coordinator, $2.15 million. Andy Ludwig, Utah offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach, just north of $2 million. Adam Fuller, Florida State defensive coordinator, just north of $2 million. Glenn Schumann, Georgia defensive coordinator, just north of $2 million. Chip Kelly, Ohio State, just north of $2 million. Morgan Scalley, Utah defensive coordinator, $2 million. That's it, 9. There's only 9 this year, according to USA Today and On3, the reports they get, whatever, that are north of $2 million. 3.2, 3. It's the new world of college football. There's so much money in this sport, but it just kind of gives you the perspective of what that investment is and why these programs may be seeking a defensive mind like that. For Knowles, everyone's probably looking, okay, the Oklahoma connection. He is from Philadelphia. He was a head coach at Cornell, 59 years old. Was the defensive coordinator at Duke, defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State, and then at Ohio State from 2022 through the last 3 seasons. Remember after his first season at Ohio State, though, there wasn't the instant gratification, right? That defense allowed a lot of big plays to the point where Ohio State fans were highly concerned about the hire. And then the last 2 years have obviously been slam dunks. But in his first season at Ohio State, and it's a fan base that's not very patient with their coaches, as we've learned with Ryan Day, they wanted to run him out of town.
And it is interesting, like you said, depending on who gets the hire here, it's for those three programs in Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, right? It's national. Your eyes on the national championship next year. Mm-hmm. It's gonna if you're paying your defensive coordinator $3+ million a year, you're expecting immediate rewards and dividends. You're expecting that Penn State defense to go from top 15, top 10 to top 3 next year. Ohio State, same thing. Notre Dame, same thing. It'll be interesting. But I think the biggest thing here is we still are right now in a holding pattern in terms of we've been waiting for now days to see, is he going to announce today? Is he going to announce tomorrow? We don't know yet. At least you could feel optimistic. If at least just keep it to Big Ten. If you're Penn State or Ohio State, or at least one of those fan bases and one of those teams is not going to keep or get Jim Knowles. At least you can go to bed at night, maybe somewhat comfortably, thinking we did everything we could. We didn't lose him because of money. We didn't lose him because of resources. And now in this world of college football, right, resources do matter. The $20 million roster Ohio State just put together was a big reason why they won the national title. Resources matter. And it's good to see at least those two programs doing everything they possibly can to try to get to that top level. And it's good to see that resources won't be a hindrance when it comes to truly breaking through to get to that number one spot.
It's funny because as we talk, I want to keep scrolling through X or Instagram. Maybe I'll even watch a
please
TikTok to see. But the only news coming out right now in the coaching world is one of the great college football coaches of all time, Pete Carroll, and you can argue about how he got it done, is the new coach of the Raiders.
Big Ten connection. Big Ten's own Pete Carroll. Good for Pete. I like that. That's actually a good fit for the Raiders. Good for them. I think it's actually, he fits exactly what they do need. Okay. All right. So Tripp's on the phone. Tripp will update us here if we get breaking news in the next, 30 minutes or so about the whereabouts of Jim Knowles. But it's a bidding war. And whoever gets something, that fan base and that team, I think their legitimacy for 2025, I think only increases by getting the best defensive coordinator in college football.
But again, I just want to reemphasize this. If your program doesn't, the investment those schools obviously have or are willing to make, number one, leaves you incredibly optimistic. And when you're those schools, it's not like plan B or C is going to be a bad option.
Right. If Jim Knowles leaves Ohio State, that is an extremely coveted job where you will have plenty of interest and you will do fine.
If he leaves Ohio State, though, and maybe Oklahoma's a little bit different situation, if he leaves Ohio State, particularly for Penn State in conference lateral move, or some would argue Ohio State's at the pinnacle, might be a narrow margin, but a bit same thing. Notre Dame, you just beat Notre Dame. No matter what that dollar figure is, what does that say? You're talking about Notre Dame or Penn State taking one of the teams you're gunning to beat, if not the only team you're gunning to beat at this point that you can't beat. You're taking, not only are you improving your staff, you hope, right? There's no guarantees. You hope. Not only are you improving your staff, but you're taking something from one of your top competitors. That'd be a real coup for either of those schools. Real.
And it's what we're talking about. I think the legitimacy for either one, I think you look at them even more differently than you do right now. You look at some preseason polls that I know you have definitely been invested in for sure. And there's a few polls I've seen where Penn State's number one. There's questions for sure. And a lot of it's, talent retention.
Can I stop you? What is today's date?
January 24th.
Who cares?
2025.
Who cares?
I'm a sucker for it. Because I like to see I'm one of those people that's what's next? What's next? Let's look ahead. Let's rush to get me to September. This helps. But the reason why I bring it up is not to break. We're not giving our top 5 teams for 2025. We're not breaking down those rankings. I'm going to spare you there, Tripp. But why I bring it up is just I do think for team I think it brings even more legitimacy to whoever lands Jim Knowles. Like you said, if you're Penn State, you could take the reigning national championship, the top team in the Big Ten, who was for the most part, them and Michigan have run the conference now for a while. You could take their DC and get them on your squad. That, like, the confidence and belief, I think that gives Penn State and James Franklin, I don't think can be measured. Like, that's massive. That never happens.
Yeah, I think
that never happens.
I agree with you that it could help one of those programs get them over the hump. But, like, I don't care if that makes them number one in the end of January rankings for 2025. I care where your program's at January 20th of 2026. Like,
I would agree.
Like, if you're in the top 10, here's what I'll give you on the rankings. You don't want to be number 30 in the look ahead to 2025 because you're probably going to be on the outside looking in unless you really have any school that appears near the top of one of those rankings has an opportunity going into next season. Any school. Like you mentioned, you don't know what Ohio State has. They could lose all their defense. They lose a lot on offense. But with how well they've recruited and who they bring in the portal, and you just, like, you can't judge it. Same for Michigan. You can't judge it. What happens if Bryce Underwood is the number one player in college football next year? What happens if Julian Sayin is the top quarterback in college football next year? Right? Like, we don't even know what Oregon's roster. Oregon loses its starting quarterback, starting running back, top receivers, tight end, starting tackle who's going to go in the first round of the NFL draft. But is anyone saying Dan Lanning's team is fried for next? Some people might have them number one going into next year. I mean, I don't think it's unthinkable. But it's all prognostication and guessing. Like, yeah, I understand why some people would have Penn State because you don't have to guess as much because they return so much. But it's also January. I can't believe me. I get why the rankings are posted. It's clicks. It's fun. But I cannot do. I'm telling you right now.
No, we're not doing. This is why I bring it up.
I cannot do this for 8 months all off season and try to. Oh, they got Jim Knowles. I'm putting them up. They're number. Yeah, it gives them a chance. But if they don't get Jim Knowles, doesn't mean they don't have a chance either. Like, I hate, you don't understand how much I despise the too early rankings for 2025.
I can't tell. You have not made your hatred. I think you should really go on a rant. That's some advice I give you here. Just really let your feelings loose.
We're not even through the first portal window yet.
Here's the only reason I'll bring it up is this. I think perception does matter at times. It doesn't help you. It does not. I'm not saying you're telling you it's going to win you games.
I think this is.
I think perception does help.
I know where you're going. I like this. I'm going to give you the floor. I know where you're going here.
And I think the perception, if Penn State, in this example here, just to keep it in the Big Ten, can get Jim Knowles out of Columbus and bring him to Happy Valley to be their defensive coordinator, $3 million. Like, even if I'm not saying it's a guarantee to work. I'm not sitting here telling you if Penn State gets Jim Knowles, they're winning the national title next year. That's not what I'm saying. But I think it does help the perception of, okay, this Penn State team is going all in. There's belief in James Franklin. Jim Knowles is, I don't want to say stamping validity on Franklin. That's not fair. But it is kind of like, okay, for questions about Penn State, can they really break through? Can they win a big game? Well, here's a guy that believes they can. Like, I think the perception, whether it works or not, is different. But the belief now, I think, does lend some credence to what James Franklin has built in Happy Valley and what they're gearing up for in 2025. Again, it's not going to win you games. Like you said, once September rolls around, the perceptions don't really matter as much. The preseason rankings do not matter. We've seen plenty of preseason teams in the top 10 fall out, and vice versa. Teams unranked shoot up into the top 10. I think this does help perception. And I think that's, again, a huge catalyst for whoever lands, or in the case of Ohio State, retains Jim Knowles.
Let me add this. In this sport, perception matters. It matters. Recruiting, funding, investments, NIL support, donor support, booster support, attendance, ticket sales. Perception does matter. While I may despise the look ahead at the rankings, I agree with you. In this sport, perception matters.
You're right. What also could be reality? Well, what is reality, Trip? Whether Jim Knowles stays or goes, right? Is that this is clearly Ryan Day's team. And I think now we're sitting here still less than a week away from the national championship. we could finally, because we didn't really talk about this too much on Monday night, but we can finally now put away the doubts, the concerns, the questions about Ryan Day's coaching ability. He still has to be Michigan, but now, I mean, he's one of the best coaches in college football. And I think what you saw on Monday night and this run in the playoff just absolutely confirms that.
You said we're not even a week out. We're only like 3 days. It seems like this is how the whole playoff run felt. And like we'll talk about the ratings for the game a little bit later on. This is how the whole playoff, and maybe it's because the 24/7, 365 news cycle of college football now. To me, it feels like that championship game happened 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. The playoffs feel like a distant memory at this point. And maybe it is the nature of the portal and how quickly things change and the urge to look ahead to 2025. All kidding aside, like it feels like it was so long ago that you were battling the lines, the Atlanta airport. Was it as bad? Was it as bad as everyone said?
Yes. And for me, I flew out early. I got to the airport at 7:15 for a 9:00 flight. And I walked in, it was chaos. But at least for me, when I got there, the lines were still inside. I saw like an hour or two after I got in there, the lines were out, like literally out the door. You're standing in the cold. And for those that don't know, Atlanta, like basically every other place right now in the U.S., freezing. Teens, windy, doesn't matter what you had, TSA, clear, nothing, all one gigantic line, lot of chaos. You know what's actually funny? I was delayed at like this, you know, when you put your bags through the x-ray machine, I was held up for about 10 minutes. You want to know what was holding me up? The Rose Bowl trophy. They had the Rose Bowl trophy in like a travel suitcase, but the travel suitcase was too big for like the TSA bins that you're supposed to put all your stuff into. So they were trying to wedge this, trying to figure out a way to fit in the bin. I don't know why they just didn't take it out and just examine it right away. But for like 10 minutes, everyone's sitting there going, what the hell is going on? And you see this like trunk and it's like, just get it out of the way. And then finally you see, okay, they take it to the side and open it. And there's the Rose Bowl trophy trying to go back out west. So it was chaotic. There was a million people there, a lot of happy Ohio State fans, a lot of sad Notre Dame fans, and one Rose Bowl trophy just trying to get through TSA pre-check.
And happy because they have Ryan Day as their coach now, finally, right? To bring this thing back to where we were. Day is now 70-10. That's an .875 winning percentage at Ohio State. And you know, 4 of those 10 losses are to Michigan. 1 national championship, 2 national title game appearances, 4 playoff appearances in 6 years. He's 5-3 now in the college football playoff. I guess he's got that 1-4 record against Michigan hanging over his head. But let's compare that. When Urban Meyer was at Ohio State, 7 seasons, right? 83-9. That's a 90 winning percentage, so slightly better. But 1 national title, Day's matched him. 1 national title game appearance. Day has 2. Different format. Benefited Ohio State this year. Wouldn't have been their past format, but I get it. Urban, 2 playoff appearances in 6 eligible years. Ryan Day, 4 in 6 years. Again, different format this year for that last berth. Urban was 7-0 against Michigan. Urban was 7. So Ohio State, right now, you start to glance. All pressure's got to be off Day, right?
No, I agree, and like I would make the argument. Trip, look,
and I
Michigan aside,
and I never put any blame, pressure, anything. Like Day, to me, the discussion was asinine to begin with. But for others, they felt like, oh, he's never going to win the big. Like what was, like in retrospect right now, real quick, before I see your question, is Ohio State in a better place under Ryan Day compared to Urban Meyer? Yeah, he runs a clean program and doesn't have all the extra noise floating around. Really easy answer. But what and Urban's one of the great coaches. I'm not saying it's not. Why was the belief Ryan Day couldn't win a big game? Where did it start? Why did it start?
I think it started Michigan. Simple as that. Because think about it, right? His first year was 2018. First year was 2019. They go to the playoff, lose that epic game to Clemson. They were back and forth, and a late Justin Fields interception ended the game. The very next year, they go right back, face Clemson, and smoke them. Smoke them. Get to the national title game. Okay, you get smoked by Alabama, but Alabama's smoking everybody in that game. No one after that game, when Ohio State lost by almost 30 to Alabama in the national title game, saying, Ryan Day, he can't win the big one. It started really in 2021 in 2022 when Michigan won I think it was really 2022 when he lost at home. You lose to the Big House, you lose to Michigan. That was a surprise, first time in a long time. Wow, I can't believe it. But then I think there's a prevailing thought of, okay, well, they come to the shoe next year. We'll bounce right back. We'll put them in their place and we'll go on. And obviously that didn't happen. Now we're talking about 4 losses in a row here for Ryan Day and Ohio State. I think that's where it comes from. I think it's the fact that he can't beat Michigan. It's not because, again, we've talked about this multiple times on the pod. He beats and or competes against every other big-time opponent they play. Or Ohio State's lost one Big Ten game outside of Michigan. They against Georgia, they competed and pushed the Dogs in the year in 2022 where no one was given, really pushing Georgia at all. They're the only team to take them to the brink and almost beat them. That's where it comes from. They should have hit a field goal. They should have won.
The kick, you win.
Right. And also, they're up by 14 for a decent amount of that game. Yes, they played great and should have won and didn't. That's, I think, where it comes from. It's just strictly about one opponent.
Yeah, I have the same answer to that. It's one opponent. Because that year, I just had to look. They're 8.5-point favorites. This year, they're 3-score favorites in that game or 3-possession favorites in that game. I agree with it. I just think it's interesting to reflect on and have the conversation now, knowing what we know played out, right? I think it's interesting.
It is. And I think one part of, one context that needs to be added that I've really not heard anyone say when it comes to, the Michigan thing. And like you mentioned, Urban 7-0, and that's obviously I think that's outside of the national title. That's the first that everyone always talks about with Urban Meyer. Mm-hmm. Outside of 2016, when they had Wilton Spade and they were a really good team, Michigan in those years when they played Ohio State were not very good. Yep. They were not the program they were in 2021, 2022, 2023.
Can I add something? Because I think it's a caveat that has to be added. You know what I'm going to say?
I don't actually.
What's the asterisk on Michigan?
Oh, the cheating. Connor Stallions, which I think is fair. Personally, I think is fair. And so, I
think this is a whole nother discussion. I think the years Michigan was good, they legitimately were good, and Harbaugh changed the culture of the program.
Yes.
But I'm not naive enough, and having watched the documentary and having been around the sport, to think it played zero impact.
Right. You're not taking away the talent. They were extremely talented. Did they get an edge? I think absolutely. And you can't tell me that knowing what the other team is running doesn't give you an advantage offensively and defensively. It's basically the entire game of cat and mouse. What's going on? Catch your opponent by surprise. If there's no element of surprise, it makes your job that so much easier. Mm-hmm. But so the talent was better. We could talk about the cheating. I think there are differences to when Ohio State's played Michigan outside of 2024, outside of that year, versus when Urban's played Michigan, where, again, most of the time you're talking about Ohio State being big favorites. You're looking at Michigan not being very good and Ohio State taking it to them. I think, again, 2016, maybe 2018 as well, when I think Michigan was a slight favorite in the shoe, which that turned out to be an absolute disaster. But Michigan, for the most part in those, let's say 5 of the 7 years, was nowhere near as good as when Ryan Day's had to face him now in 3 of the last 4 years. I think that context, I think, is important.
So you posed the question, is Ohio State in a better place under Ryan Day compared to Urban Meyer? And what my initial comment was, not a veiled shot at Urban Meyer, but all of his programs, Florida, Ohio State, they didn't come without noise and distractions. And part of the Urban Meyer regime at each of those places, you have to at least acknowledge that there's some ancillary things involving the program that cloud your perspective and take away from truly just the on-field accomplishments. They do. And because of that, because of the record, because I think you see the type of leader Ryan Day is, the success they've had, I don't know if they're in a better place, but Urban Meyer's the gold standard in Columbus, the gold standard for what he did during his time there. Even though they only won that championship in 2014, he's the gold standard. Ryan Day's brought Ohio State right back to that neighborhood and probably is putting up a bigger house down at the end of the block. Like, I think I respect Ryan Day, what they went through this year, how he went about his business. Yes, I think Ohio State is in a better place under Ryan Day than they were under Urban Meyer.
And when you talk, like, at least I'm going to look at this question through the lens of national championship, like goals, right? Like, if your goal is to win a national title every year, which coach gives you the better chance? To me, it does feel like Ryan Day, because now, again, losing to Michigan, which is a problem, does not exclude you from the playoff and making it. Mm-hmm. And you look like, I think one of the big things with Urban that, again, maybe gets overlooked is the fact that, like, those teams, they beat Michigan every year, but they also had one clunker, one stinker every year where you're getting blown up by Purdue. You're getting blown up by Iowa. So, like, they win big games, but then all of a sudden have a letdown. It kind of did feel like you were riding a little bit of a roller coaster at times with Urban. And then you get to the bowl games, they would win the bowls, but they would not make the playoff as much. The only other time they made the playoff under Urban, they got housed by Clemson, 31-0. And it's like, you look at Ohio State under Ryan Day, they don't get blown out. They do not get blown out. They are very competitive. They're there every year. It feels like they're always in the national title mix. It does feel like, well, he has a Michigan problem, and that's something that Urban has perfected. I think that's the reason why Urban is so beloved in Columbus. Like, when you look at it just from who gives you a better chance to win a national championship each and every year, which for me is still the number one goal for any program, I feel like Ryan Day right now has Ohio State in a better place to win a national title every single year than Urban Meyer did.
But is college football better or worse that rivalries now have been devalued because of the current format?
I would not say they're devalued. Like, the results maybe in the sense of
Ohio State lost to Michigan, an average Michigan team, at home, and won the national championship. You cannot tell me rivalries. Like,
I'll say this. You heard Ryan Day's wife in the weeks leading up to this game talk about what it was like after the Michigan game. They had to have an armed guard at their house because they're afraid of lunatic fans harassing them. That is disgusting, first and foremost. Let's put that out there. We're not advocating or acknowledge, like, we're not supporting that behavior. But that behavior, to me, says the Michigan rivalry, even if you make the playoff, still matters. Like, you could say it's devalued in the sense of, do those rivalries that in the past used to determine who competes for a national championship and a Big Ten title, who doesn't, is that part devalued? Yes. But, like, from the fans' perspective, which I think rivalries more, honestly, are with the fans more than just, like, what it means for your season outlook, per se. No, do the fans care? Yes.
But if I told you, if you're an Ohio State fan, and I told you right now, you could lose to Michigan, but win the national championship, or you can beat Michigan and not win the national championship, which are you taking?
I'm taking lose to Michigan, win the national title every year. That's me.
Exactly. And I think a lot of fans,
though, I don't think are.
So the game is devalued. The game's devalued.
But if you still get upset, if you want to, Ryan Day was going to be fired, or every fan, I should say, wanted him fired after the game. That's still because he can't beat Michigan, that's still a big deal.
It's a big deal, but it doesn't matter. Like, in the grand scheme, it doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't.
But losing to, you're still having the ability to win a national championship. Doesn't make the Michigan loss any better. Like, it doesn't make it easier to digest.
But it doesn't matter that they lost. Like, listen to fans now. No one's talking about that they lost to Michigan. Ohio State won the national title. Rivalries.
That doesn't make it like they're still upset about it.
Not that upset. That celebration on the field after the title, the celebration they're having on Sunday. Not going to be lamenting that they lost to Michigan. I think, I don't know that we have big enough sample size of whether the playoff is good for college football, the 12 team, or bad, or how it's going to impact the sport moving forward. Because I think there's going to be tweaks to it that makes it tougher for an 8 seed, tougher for a 7 seed to make the run that they all did in this playoff. And prevent. It's so long. And we'll get into the ratings here too, right? ESPN reported a 22.1. They reported 22.1 million viewers for the championship game, which in this everyone ditching cable era is the most non-watched NFL sporting event of the year. And the event still peaked at 26.1 million viewers. Last year, though, 25 million. It's a 12.5% drop. That being said, 3 of the lowest 11 college football playoff title games have all occurred in the last 5 years. So it's like how much you read into it. I still think the sample size is too small. But that number, the championship game thing, like not mattering, buys hurting teams in the playoff, rivalries devalued, losses devalued, all these hypotheticals of conference. Like, I have a lot of respect for Josh Pate. I think he does a great job. I think his show's great. But he put a poll out, which, again, isn't his power ratings. It's some formula that he's got. And it's just got SEC team after SEC team after SEC team in the top 15. Like, what is your formula to rate these teams? Is it, oh, they play in the SEC, so they're all top 15 teams? Like, all of this, I don't know that it's good for college football. And maybe the TV ratings are indicating that with how long and drawn out the season is, the portal stuff that's all happened, right? It's a 1-year sample size. It comes back to this rivalry thing. Can you come back to Ryan Day versus Michigan? And the ratings may justify it. Is this all good for college football? I don't know. Like, it all goes hand in hand.
I think it's too early to tell, number one. I would agree with you there. But let's dive into then why. Because at least for me, I was thinking this even before the game on Monday, before any ratings were put out. The fact that the biggest game, quote unquote, in college football this season is on a Monday night, to me, number one, is ridiculous. That is absurd. Like, I think you're hurting your viewership by putting it on a Monday night in general. And now with the expanded schedule, you're putting this game on a Monday night after divisional round weekend, the weekend that most football fans will call the best weekend in the NFL with the games that you have. Like, you're just giving yourself no chance at this point. Because like, I honestly, Trip, even though I was there, I felt it. Like, you watch the 2 games Saturday, you watch the 2 games Sunday, you wake up Monday, okay, let's talk about them. And then it's almost like, oh yeah, wait, we have a national championship. Like, it's just, I think just the nature of the schedule, first and foremost, of being on a Monday night after a weekend, it is tough to, unless you're an Ohio State fan or a Notre Dame fan, right? And obviously, we're excluding those because obviously you are very excited. If your team's in the game, this is different. But just
those
the general,
two of the biggest brands in the sport. Two of the biggest brands in the sport. Yep.
But just a general college football fan, which makes up a large part of these ratings, and just a general fan, overall, that will tune in to help these ratings. I think it is easy to forget / hard to say, oh, you know what? I just spent all day Saturday watching the NFL, all day Sunday watching the NFL. Let's do it again on Monday night when this game's not going to kick off till almost 8 o'clock at night. Let me lock in for 3.5 hours. I think it's tough. I think first and foremost, if you want to improve the ratings, I think you got to move the game. And maybe going up against the NFL is impossible. So fine, Saturday and Sunday are out. What about Friday? I think
but it's not like
Thursday or Friday.
The semifinal games didn't garner. Like, everyone thought Penn State, Notre Dame would draw a huge number, and it didn't. It was what, 17.2, I think, was the number.
Yeah.
Everyone thought those would draw huge numbers too. And the Friday night game was a little bit better with Ohio State, Texas. But those games, okay, I think it's too late into the year, honestly. But here, I know I just kind of made fun of Josh Pate's little poll that he does. I did hear him discuss something interesting, and he didn't really dive into it a lot. But the point he made was that during the regular season now, Fox, the Big Ten, the Big 12, NBC, Big Ten, Notre Dame, CBS, Big Ten, ESPN, SEC, the CW, right? There's
ACC.
These games are spread over so many networks.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the constant cross promotion. When you get to the playoff, all of the games live on ESPN. If you're not locked in on ESPN, you don't know about the playoff. ESPN's the only entity, Big Ten Network I get, but like ESPN's the only entity really covering the playoff. If I'm the Big Ten and my powerhouse media partners are NBC, Fox, and CBS, I'm going, and I'm not saying during the middle of the Eagles trying to fend off the Rams on Sunday during the final drive of the fourth quarter. But during halftime of that game, where is, hey, let's send it down to Atlanta. Here's Dave Revson with Howard Griffith with a quick preview of Monday's national championship because Ohio State's playing in it. Where's a pregame show segment with that? Because Ohio State is one of your Big Ten partners is playing in the game. Once the Big Ten championship was done, I know there's CBS Sports Network, and I know you work, but I'm not gonna, sorry, it's coming here. But CBS doesn't cover the Big Ten after the Big Ten championship game. Fox isn't covering college football after the Ohio State-Michigan game. Like, I guess CBS Sports Network has some. I guess FS1 might have some. Big Ten Network has it. But all those networks, you don't know that college football's still going on. Because if you're not on ESPN, you don't get that promotion. And I think that, Josh Pate kind of made this point, but to further amplify it, as a Big Ten fan, as a Big Ten supporter, as a Big Ten media member, as a Big Ten school, aren't you frustrated that your media partners go silent the biggest, most important part of the year when when you have 4 teams in the playoff, 3 of your premier programs are left in the top 8, and 2 of them are playing for a national championship game berth, and one of them's in the championship and then wins it. It's not like they're covering it. And I think that ultimately hurts the sport, that all your games are distributed and your best – look, the Big Ten's the best conference in college football this year, and probably your biggest brands in college football, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, USC, outside of the SEC. And those media partners are non-existent when the games matter most, which is your 12-team playoff. And ESPN, believe me, I thought their coverage was great. I thought, you turn on ESPN whenever, it's on every show, it's on they're constantly talking about it. But ESPN's one cable network. It's not one of the national, it's not Fox, CBS, ABC, NBC.
Right. That's interesting.
NFL's
I never thought
there.
about it like that.
NFL's there. Those sports are. Why doesn't the college football playoff national championship game air on ABC? Your rating will be higher. It's an ESPN cable money grab.
It's fair. I don't know. It's a fair question.
I mean, I know they need subscribers. They need someone to buy ESPN Plus and Hulu Plus and all the other crap, but it's a money grab. That's
also makes it.
That's why if you want to compare college football ratings to the NFL, you can't, because it's not apples to apples. But then also is the Big Ten. Why aren't your partners promoting your teams?
I think also the question, because that's great insight and something I had not thought about. Why also is the college football playoff not having a bidding war for their rights?
I mean, they did, but
didn't ESPN rib? I don't know the details. Yeah, I'm not going to try to talk about it too much.
More complicated than that. I mean, they did, but they didn't, and it's supposed to open back up. The college football playoff is being hurt by the ESPN monopoly on it. It's being hurt in that SEC narrative bullcrap we heard all season. It's being hurt by ESPN controlling the narrative. It's being hurt by it just living on ESPN. College sports are dying. College football is at a crossroads. And part of the problem, there's a lot of problems in the sport, is the NCAA has very little jurisdiction on the college football playoff, which may be a good or a bad thing. The NCAA has no idea how to handle NIL and is just trying not to get sued. And they're just trying to survive. College football needs commissioners. But one of the major problems in college sports and particularly college football is that the sports and and football in particular is being run by TV executives.
I agree. I totally agree. And that's the reason, by the way, for a lot of Big Ten fans that are upset, that's the reason why Fox Noon kickoff is a thing and why, despite all your bitching, all your complaining, all your protesting, it ain't changing. Trust me, I'll speak for myself. I hate it.
Yeah.
But it's not going anywhere because, like you said, the ones who make the decisions are the execs. And they see dollar figures, don't care about the fans.
Why are USC and UCLA in the Big Ten? It's not because the Big Ten presidents or the athletic directors were like, oh, we need to go get USC and UCLA. It's because they needed a home and they went to Fox and Fox said, put them in the Big Ten. That's our partner.
I agree. And I think sometimes the fall of college football, if you will, is sometimes overblown. But I think the problems you just highlighted are very fair and very real. And I think are impacting right now a sport that should be continued. I think the interest is there. Like, I think the interest continues to grow. Mm-hmm. I'm with you, though. I think they do make it tough for themselves at times to maximize that. One other question, just to kind of put a bow on this before we wrap up the pod here. Because I've seen this as well. Forget about the actual day of the week. Do you think it will help college football? Because you mentioned before about the season being too long. If you say, you know what, here's what we're going to do. We're going to follow the NFL model. 12 games in the regular season. Screw the conference championship weekend. The next weekend, we're going to get right to the playoff. And the season, the national title will end on January 1st, which is, right, the college football day that they have. This year is 3 national quarterfinal games on that day. Do you think, you know what, if you shorten the schedule, January 1st, every year national title game, that helps just, I guess, the ratings, if you will, and kind of helps maybe more college football fans be engaged to where you're not kind of forgetting about a national championship game happening on a Monday night in the middle of January?
Yes, I think it won't happen. I think there's too many parties and politics at play. Yes.
Okay.
That would be good. I agree. It'd be good for the sport in a lot of areas. Calendar, the length, see all that. But yeah,
transfer portal, I think would help because school does not start. I think. Okay. Simple as that. All right, let's finish then, Trip, with something you love, a look ahead here. But we're not going to do teams or rankings, but instead about quarterbacks, right? Because that's actually tangible. We've seen a lot of these guys play. Some are returning, some are going. Obviously, Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel, 2 of the most prolific quarterbacks in the Big Ten, are now going to the NFL. They've run out of eligibility. So let's do this, Trip. Let's talk a little top 5 quarterbacks in the Big Ten going into 2025. Mm-hmm. We each have a top 5. We'll go from 5 to 1 here. Do you want to give your list first? You go from 5 to 1. Let's break it down here.
Yeah, and as I was researching this, a couple things I just want to share with our audience that popped up. Please. Did you know that we're so invested, and like I want to get into all the coordinator changes, and we can kind of put a bow on that, I think, starting next week, as it seems like the movement will start to settle down. But Maryland, I want to see, like, I don't know, Billy Edwards Jr., I knew he still had eligibility. I'm like, yeah, he might be a top 5. All 3 of their quarterbacks in the transfer portal. Billy Edwards Jr. out. Maryland's quarterback battle will be between 4-star prospect Malik Washington and Justin Martin from UCLA, transferred to Maryland. Not in my top 5. I know he's battled injuries. I don't know that he's ever kind of flourished the way everyone thought he was going to, but their running back Roman Hemby also ended up at Indiana. Name to watch for next year.
Okay. I like it.
All right. I know my list is different than yours. And mine's a little bit more based on wild projections and talent around the personnel.
You?
Number 5.
Projecting?
Number 5, Luke Altmaier, Illinois. I think he had a great year. Didn't turn the ball over. I think he made a lot of good plays. But I feel like he's got a ceiling at some point. So I'm going to go Luke Altmaier, number 5. Number 4, Bryce Underwood, Michigan.
Wow.
Number 4. Number 3, Julian Sayin, Ohio State.
Double projection.
Number 2,
I hope if you're watching or listening, you are sitting down right now.
And number 1, Drew Aller, Penn State.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Number 2 is who?
Fernando Mendoza, Cal quarterback, transferring to Indiana. And then number 1 is Drew Aller from Penn State.
Wow.
And probably if I added
a
a 6, it would probably be either Austin Novosad or Dante Moore from Oregon. Would probably be 6, just based on where they're playing, who they are, and what they got around them. I know I left some big names off that list, but
you did. I'm sorry, I mean to cut you off here. I'm more surprised of your projection. Bryce Underwood, Julian Sand, you're feeling they can come in right away and make an immediate impact.
I don't see any reason to doubt that based on personnel, talent, track record, those programs. If those programs truly are going to be top 10, top 15 teams again next year, which in all likelihood they will be, I don't see any reason why particularly Ohio State or Oregon wouldn't be. Those quarterbacks are going to be among the top 5 to 6 in the Big Ten.
Saying is interesting. A lot of talent are coming from Alabama. The questions number one, I don't know if Chip Kelly is going to leave for the NFL, but at least right now as an offense coordinator job, it feels like a question. You have the best, you could argue the best. What? You don't think it's a question? You think he's safely in Columbus next year? Okay. So Chip Kelly, then, if you are correct, is in Columbus, but you're still losing both your running backs. You're losing 4 to the 5 offensive linemen. Now you could argue maybe the best player in all of college football in Jeremiah Smith, which helps big time.
And Carnell Tate said he's coming back.
Mm-hmm. Back as well. That clearly helps. Still got some questions about Ohio State. Maybe this is just
still
idiotic.
Ohio State.
I know. I'm not trying to. I'm not poo-pooing it. Those are questions right now. Okay, so my top 5 then are this. I have Dylan Raiola at number 5. I do think now having a full off season with Dana Holgorsen will help. I thought he looked a little bit more comfortable, and the offense looked a little bit better in the short time that Holgorsen was there. I think, again, a nice offseason development will help Raiola here in year number 2. Number 4, Jaden Mayava, who it was a small stint at USC trip, but boy, was it. He had 15 total touchdowns in just 4 starts for USC. USC's they lost some receivers, but also brought a lot back here as well. Mekhi Lemon is one that I think will have a big year in 2025. And that Lincoln Riley just system that he runs produces a lot of good quarterbacks, a lot of successful quarterbacks. I think Mayava, with his skill set, will fit right and have a big year. I'm going to go your boy Mendoza here, number 3. I mean, he fits exactly what Kirk Cignetti wants, looking for a veteran quarterback who is more like a point guard, right? I don't think Mendoza's going to he's not going to kill you with his athleticism, but I think he's smart decision maker. Only had 6 interceptions last year for Cal. That's a guy that I think can fit kind of the Curtis Rourke mold and have success with the Hoosiers. Number 2, I'm going to go Luke Altmaier here. I'm higher on Altmaier than you are. I would agree with the ceiling for sure. But I also think the fact that, I think with another year in the system, he can improve. To me, he's a gamer. We're the stats maybe aren't great. Is he going to be top 5 in passing for Illinois next year? Probably not. But that's a guy that I feel like I do trust. That I think in some big moments he comes through. He's clutch. The numbers won't show, but I do trust a lot in Luke Altmaier here. I think he can have a big 2025 season. And I'm with you. Drew Allar, number 1. I think he's the most talented quarterback. In terms of returning guys, he leads basically every stat for Big Ten quarterbacks. Now, the big question, right, for him, and you mentioned it, part of your rankings was help around him, right? Well, there is a big question for Penn State in terms of you lose Tyler Warren from your offense, and you lose at least your starting 2 receivers in Harrison Wallace and Omari Evans. Receiver's going to be a big question mark for Penn State. If they can get it, though, I mean, Allar should be able to elevate those guys that come in.
And Omari Evans going to Washington. So you got Big Ten to Big Ten.
That's right.
It's funny when this whole portal thing opened. Remember when you could block transfers from going to in-conference?
Yes. I think the SEC had that rule, and they exercised it a few times. Yes. Now you can go from Ohio State to Michigan. You can go from Alabama to Auburn. Rivalries and
Purdue's rosters on other Big Ten team. Any good player from Purdue from last year is on a different Big Ten team.
Oh, just a coincidence, though, right, Trip? Nothing nefarious there, that's for sure. But yeah,
they
right
didn't talk to them after they played or anything.
Hey, give me a call in 2 months. We could use it next year. Oh, that's the state.
That was fun. It was a good podcast. It was fun.
Can you do me a favor before we go? Can you check your phone? No Jim Knowles updates here. We said as soon as the pod was over that we're going to get news. So this is our last-ditch effort to get the Jim Knowles breaking news of where he will be coaching in 2025 on the pod before we have to wait till at least Monday's edition. No news.
Only news is Pete Carroll that came out during this.
Again, one of the Big Ten's finest coaches. So congrats to Pete Carroll going to the Raiders. And we shall wait at least maybe a few more minutes, a few more hours, maybe a few more days to find out right now where the most wanted defensive coordinator, maybe college football history, will end up. Hopefully by Monday we have
Luke Altmaier, laughing face at the final. I like Josh Pate. I think he does a good job. But
well, that's nicer than what Brett Bielema said.
I don't know what that.
Brett Bielema was ready to fight him.
He claims it's his what is it? His formula?
I have no idea. I'm with you. I like Josh Pate.
I think he's great. I think he's great.
The poll he puts out there, I have no idea what it is. I just know that he claims it's not a ranking. I don't know what that means personally.
Well, then he's got to fix his formula because
Georgia,
Ole Miss, Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina and Texas. Like, what is the formula? Hey, here's the SEC.
Beat well, I mean, this is
like it doesn't help with the narrative and the bias and like all that the Southern media had. And maybe we're the antithesis of that. Here,
remember, Trip, bowl losses or bowl games don't count for the SEC if they lose. They only matter if they win. So South Carolina's lost to Illinois does not matter.
In the final AP poll, 4 Big Ten teams in the top 10, only 3 from the SEC. Illinois, first time ranked in the final AP poll since 2007. They finished 16th, highest ranking since 2001. And the Big Ten, of course, was 4-1 versus the SEC in bowl games, right? 4-1, 5-1.
I believe so. Yeah, 8-2 in the last 2 college football playoff brackets. Not bad. Big Ten right now, chugging along.
Great time to host a Big Ten podcast. Although some may argue clicks could be, sometimes when things are going bad, it's a lot easier to get. Then again,
so should we get on the Illinois bandwagon right now? Should we just
clamoring to listen? So,
should we crap on them? Should we crap on Illinois saying that they suck? They're overrated.
No, because
16 is a joke. Let's get some clicks by negativity here. Out of context, Brian Tripp says Brett Bielema is a bad coach.
Brian Tripp loves Brett Bielema, so
I'm going to put that on a graphic for sure. That will get some still enrolled attention.
Not fun.
Okay, well, thank you for listening to this first edition of the offseason Still Enrolled podcast. Again, we are going nowhere here. We got still coming Monday, a Big Ten year in review. Look back on everything that happened, the good, the bad, the ugly, as well. Kind of give you some grades and kind of look back one last time in the 2024 season before we really turn our attention here fully to 2025 and beyond. Again, make sure you're subscribing.
And if you're watching on YouTube, there's a whole lot of ugly.
That's true. You ain't kidding about that. Look at that. Look at that face we're looking at here. How about, can you beautify the pod? Can you unzip before the podcast started? For those who don't know, Trip and if you're watching,
all right,
come on, unzip.
Thanks for tuning in.
Go full Philly. You have an NC title game here in a few days. Go full Philly. Can we get an EAGLES Eagles? Look at that. Philly politicians spelled that correctly. Spelling's hard sometimes. Come on, just go full Philly for us here. Speaking of ugly,
go Birds.
Subscribe on YouTube, where maybe one day Trip will take a shirt off for us. That'll be the last. Yeah, there's some still enrolled no context for you. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you Monday right here on the Still Enrolled Pod.